Hello, and welcome to Secrets from Athletes. I'm your host, Andre Schall. And as athletes, we all have dreams. For some, it's the NBA. For some, the NFL. For some, very timely right now, it's the World Cup. But there's one dream that I know many athletes share regardless of their sport, and that is the Olympics. Be seen as one of the best athletes in the world for their sport, the highest level of international competition. And those dreams extend from not just competing at the Olympics, but winning gold. Being crowned as one of the best athletes in your sport in the entire world, standing at the top of a podium and being engraved in history forever. Today with me, I have a very special guest who chased that dream, sit at the top of a podium, and achieve that Olympic gold. Member of the U.S. Women's 8 that won gold at the 2008 Beijing Games, Lindsay Shoop. Thank you so much for being on. How are you doing today, Lindsay?
You know, Andre, I'm doing great. I am really glad to be here and have this conversation. I think a couple of things that you already said immediately made me think about situations. Real quick, if you don't mind, it's so interesting when you say not all sports are part of the Olympics. And there was a year when we got to do a coin toss at an NFL game. And one of the guys that was on the field there doing the coin toss looked down at me and looked at my medal around my neck because we were there during the Olympics. And he said, or right after the Olympics, he said, I'd rather play for one of those any day over a Super Bowl ring, which I thought was a really, significant nod to the respect that athletes have for the Olympic stage.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's in the 2028 games, there's actually going to be flag football. So now some football players have a chance.
Yeah.
So I feel like normally when you're on podcasts, you get asked, how did you get into the sport? I have a bit of a different question here. When did you decide to end your time on the national team, and looking back, was the entire journey worth it?
Yeah, as you well know, I wrote one book so far, and there is an entirely second part of that memoir, that kind of story of how I got into the sport of rowing and how I went from being overweight and insecure all the way to the Olympics. There was a whole second half because people will finish reading that book and they'll go, well, what happened next? Like, you said you wanted to row forever, right? And then you stopped.
Yeah.
And so for me, it was something that I realized after the Olympics is that everything that my teammates and I achieved wasn't because it was just like, I row because I want to go to the Olympics. It was, I row because this thing is making me better at being me. I'm getting fitter. I feel smarter. I feel healthier. My brain is happier. I'm more productive. I'm more creative. All of these things that was making me better at being a human. I felt like myself. I felt like a better me than I had ever been in my entire life. And I got to do that with a team of people, that was basically on board with that same thing. And so the winning of the Olympics was more that it was the byproduct of our desire to be better than we were yesterday at this weird sport that a lot of people are starting to become really interested in, And so when I moved from college and decided to kind of get into the national team, when I went from college, we had a really great camaraderie among the team. And then when I got to the national team, it was very similar because the coach overhauled the structure of the team and how it was going to be organized. And so what happened was that he sent everybody away, and it just ended up being this kind of small group of people that was pretty much like being on a novice squad. If you think back to like whether you were in elementary school when you started rowing, or 8th grade, 9th grade, freshman year of college, whenever it was, that when we stepped up to the national team stage, we weren't on the national team, right? You're not on it until you actually make a boat and go. But we were training for the national team, but it felt very similar. And so we had a really good camaraderie there as well. So when it was a really, really hard decision for me to stop rowing, I almost came out of retirement twice, and that is super common for athletes to be like, I'm still good at this. I still love this. You rest and regain some perspective, and all of a sudden you want to dive back into it. Ultimately, I kind of fell in love with coaching and helping other people get faster instead. But when I decided to step out, the culture had changed on the team. And it went from camaraderie and supportive, even when sometimes, yeah, sure, you don't agree about everything and you're not getting along and it's not peachy keen every day. But the overarching picture was that we were all on board with the same kind of positive progress toward being better. And when that changed and the culture changed, and a lot of my other teammates from the Olympics were taking time off, like I had also taken time off, I felt like an island in and of myself in a very toxic culture. And then I started to confront, I went the first 7.5 years of my career without an injury issue. Yeah, went all the way to the Olympics, no injury issues. That has informed how I coach and everything I've studied since my time with the national team, But I did start to confront not just physical injury, all the weird questions in my mind actually started to happen first. Things that were making me question what I was doing, because I was like, I don't feel as happy as I used to feel. I don't feel as energized. I didn't want to hang out with my friends anymore. Even small things would really irritate me. And that was my mind telling me that there was something wrong, and I just wasn't sure what it was. I actually went to our coaches and said, something is wrong and I don't know what it is. Because at the time I didn't have the words for it, because I had never experienced it in rowing before, because it had been nothing but positive up until that point where it did start to deteriorate my ability to get better. So then if you combine the overtraining that kind of did eventually turn into injury, but also take that, and I was no longer feeling supported by the people that I was with, that's what ultimately made me realize. I had an aha moment because of that, Andre, where I went, I was signed up for this because it turned out I really liked the people I was with. And it just happened that we got that fast. We operated very similarly to most teams out there. We worked hard at practice, and we made sure that we played hard outside of practice. We made sure that we had hobbies and laughed about stupid things, and we were able to do things that really let us kind of be light and airy outside of practices, and that's what really made it special. And then when that kind of disappeared, it made that the weight of that kind of confronting this, these people aren't nice to me either. Why would I want to be here? And that made it it was a hard question. It was a hard decision. But when I realized that, it actually made it a lot easier.
I mean, I think what you said, that the Olympic gold was kind of the byproduct of the whole process. I feel like that's how you truly achieve something incredible, is because you focus so much on the process. Like when I was reading your book, finished it in 3 days.
I love all the tabs. That's amazing.
Yeah. I color-coded them based on different things that I thought was important.
Cool.
My mom thought it was a little too analytical of me, but...
your tabs, you mean, and how you color coded them? Yeah. It's really interesting because I tell you, and this is something, literally what I just told you, I have not had that many chances to talk about on podcasts because people just wanted to talk about you get to there, but you started with what happened after. Why did you stop if this was going this way? And that again is that's the whole the crux, the DNA, the core, the magma of the next book. And as you go along through it, there were just all these steps in the process of how did you actually build up to there? What did you want to do that? What did make you want to do that thing? And what really drove me, I've wanted to write a book for a very long time. I mean, when I was in 6th grade, I had friends that picked on me for my stories, right? So I am back to writing a lot. I make myself sit down at my desk whenever mornings I'm not coaching so that I can kick out some creativity, because I have more in me that needs to be written that is so pertinent, and not just the second half of the story. I've been writing poetry and I have some novel ideas and stuff, but the idea that why I wanted to write this book, let alone the second book, is that this first book really is, in my sense, I felt that it was very much a blueprint, because people, as I started doing more, as I was coaching and as I started doing more webinars and talks and things like that, people started to ask, whoa, how did you not get hurt? How did this happen? What was different about your era of athletes compared to athletes that came afterward, right? Because we were very successful on honestly minimal resources and okay erg scores. We weren't erg horses, right? We were very good at understanding our bodies, each other, and the natural environment. So our capacity to row really, really well was very high, So when I looked at it, I thought, if anyone wants to know what is going on here, I looked at it as research into all the things that helped me have really positive experiences on my teams. And there are some teams that I actually talk about some experiences that I had that weren't so positive, and that kind of contrast of a coach that did yell versus a coach that just guided and provided kind of breadcrumb opportunities to develop. And there are interesting things in here that I wrote very specifically. Here's the moment, but let me actually expose the moment a little bit. For instance, when I did, here's an easy for instance for me to recall, when I did start training full time, I always love asking people this in conversations, is our first day of practice. Imagine what your first day of practice with a national team would be like. And usually people say, oh my gosh, I can only imagine how far you rode or what you did or if you had to run or whatever time you met in the morning. And I'm like, well, we met at 7:00, right? That was typical standard, sometimes 7:30, which was amazing. That's much better for your health, honestly. It would get pushed forward because most of us had jobs that we also had to go to, where you would go to practice, take a break, go to practice, go to work. But very early on, our first day of practice was we reorganized the boathouse. We spent 2 hours of the morning reorganizing the boathouse, putting all the team boats very high because we would be rowing singles, and a double was considered a big boat because small boats teach you really good skills. There are things that eights teach you, but there are certain things that singles and doubles and pairs really teach you more than an eight can. And then it was, our coach told us, he said, and you need to understand how to fix this because look around you. Do you see a boatman? This is not that. If it breaks, you have to fix it. Right? And then he said, you need to get a heart rate monitor. We can get you a discount, but you need a really good heart rate monitor because that's going to help you make sure that you aren't going too hard on the easy days and too easy on the hard days. And he said, and you need a stroke coach because you're going to be in a single or a double or a straight four or a quad, and there will not be a coxswain there to tell you what your stroke rate is and how fast you're going. So that accountability and that trust development, our coach was we got to practice that day and he was up the rack already moving things around, right? So he was right in there with us in terms of accountability being the thing, not just the training. It was never about putting your head down and doing the work. There was a lot more to it than that.
Interject real quick. So you mentioned a stroke coach. For our listeners who don't row, what exactly is that?
Great catch. Yeah, so it's actually, so now we have speed coaches. At the time, a stroke coach, because I prefer minimal gadgetry, and it was cheaper. I had to buy the thing myself. That a stroke coach is something that tells you how many strokes per minute you're taking, and depending on the type of stroke coach that you do have, it's going to tell you how fast you're going, your strokes per minute. It might tell you what your acceleration is if you want to get much more, advanced than that. It'll calculate your time, how long your lapse time, if you set it for a race or something like that, how far you've traveled. It gives you the basics of what you need to really know your speed. The most important thing, stroke rate, how fast are you going, how far have you gone?
And the stroke rate, that is just how many strokes per minute you're taking with the oars.
Yep, exactly. And when you're racing, it's going to be well over 30 a minute, and when you're not racing, it's going to be below 20 a minute. So and then you're going to spend little bits of your time somewhere in between there.
Yeah. I mean, when I read through your book and I saw the first days of national team practice and it was just reorganizing, like you said, I was honestly very surprised. Mm-hmm. And then, before you were saying how the environment was, such a good, uplifting environment, when I was reading through them, I was, not to use the word surprised again, but surprised that it was, even though you each were, fighting for your spot on the team, you were doing it as a team.
Yeah. And that was really important. And I don't know, it would be interesting to, every time I have a conversation, it would be interesting to have our national team coach sit down next to me because he was a very quiet person, still is a quiet person. He runs the program at Columbia now. And it was almost like we always thought that he was always thinking whatever it was that we thought he was thinking, which is exactly what he needed. The less he said, the more we just assumed he was thinking whatever he needed us to think he was thinking, if that circular logic makes sense, right? It was very functional because if, he brought in a group of people that was small. Like I said, he sent all the veterans away. We were basically 7 novices that had really barely rowed singles before. So again, for people that don't know, rowing a single is one person in the boat. That one person gets 2 oars. It is the smallest, tippiest, most responsive boat out there. And it is also the slowest boat out there. It will be the longest. But it's a lot of fun. It is a lot of fun. It is definitely a lot of fun. You can get into a lot of precarious situations depending on what the weather is doing, but that'll teach you a lot. But it was interesting because he when he did that, that meant that he allowed us to be kind of the nucleus, the culture. And then very gradually, and I talk about this in this book, is where there was one or two people that he would bring back at a time, who also, in hindsight, as I reflected on all of this and kind of my exploration, it was like an archaeological dig through what really made us go better than probably we should have. And he brought really humble, positive role models for us to kind of follow along with. We were the young energy with the talent, or what, I shouldn't say talent, but technically with some physical talent. People in our group were pretty strong. But to have kind of the psychological guidance of the others who were not super outspoken, who were always very kind of glass half full, hopeful people that were also pretty good at rowing or pretty good at going very hard, or both things, that they could teach us things without us even really realizing it. And as a coach, I have very much thought about that with teams that I've worked with in terms of recruiting. You have certain athletes that bring certain skill sets to a group, and you need them. And then you have other athletes that bring other skill sets to a group, and you need those too. And by their powers combined, some combination of those people is going to, if, let's say you're putting together an 8 out of 20 people, you have the 20 characteristics that you need. 8 people that embody all of the best characteristics of those 20 are going to start to rise to the top. And the unfortunate thing is that unlike a soccer team, talking about the World Cup, unlike a soccer team, those other dozen people don't get to stand there on the sideline and be technically a part. They aren't going to go up on the podium if the team wins like a soccer team would. But they contribute to the high-end speed of those crews. It's just our sport is unique in that the other people on the team, no one knows who we are, let alone who they are. So it's a much tougher pill to swallow to have the sense that maybe you're there to make someone else fast enough to win the Olympics.
But I still feel like that is, even though it's, like you're saying, not a glamorous role, it's still an important one.
It's a very important role. And to this day, there is someone in my book, she's the Dirks in the book, Megan Dirkmatt, McCourt now, and she would cringe if she heard me say her name right now. But every time I see her, I just say thank you, because she really taught me how to row. And then when my teammate, Elle Logan, who went on to win 3 Olympic gold medals, turned around and said that to me one day in the boat, I thought, wait, talking to me. Like all 2-3 years later, all of a sudden I went from thanking someone else for teaching me how to row. And of course it's an accumulation. It wasn't that first day, but it was the first time when I rowed with Dirks that I all of a sudden started to feel like I was actually figuring something out. And she had very intentionally taught it to me. Where, we're talking, we were partnered together in a pair, and we had, I can't remember the distance that we had to do on this particular day. I could look it up because I have my training logs, right? I have the stack of training logs. She stopped about 500 meters to go on the course. If you've ever rowed at Lake Mercer, last 500 by where that gazebo is in Lake Mercer, we stopped the boat and she said, okay, we're going to try something. And this is after we had already been in the boat for more than an hour. And she stopped it for the last 500 meters and she told me to do something. We changed a little bit what we were doing. She was like, don't push so hard. Right? You can't just push everything all at once. The blade has to be in the water, and then you push just a little more. And then once we started to get a little better grip on the water, it was just gradually add a little more pressure as I felt that. And that's what we did for 500 meters, spun the boat, went back to the dock, right? So we maybe rode like 800 meters better that day, but she very intentionally taught me. And she knew how to help fix it simply by us rowing together in that pair.
And I feel like that's part of row in our sport is that it's like, you look like, the person's going all out all the time, but there still needs to be a lot of finesse,
yes,
or else all that power is wasted.
Yes.
So with all these early morning practices, 2 to 3 practices a day, and having to go to work between all of them, like you said in the book, sharing a duplex with your teammates.
Yeah.
What was your why behind sticking in there, like keeping to do that stuff?
Yeah, it was really important to me when I wrote the book. There was one journal entry in particular, the night before I bumped into my college coach, and it ends with, I wish I had done crew. Then I might have actually been something the world will never know. Then I wouldn't have been a lazy bum. The world will never know. And that includes me. That's how I felt about myself in that moment, and at the time we didn't have all the same, terms for things. I had stopped playing sports and had gained weight. My grades were the worst that they had ever been. The lowest grade I ever got in my entire life was a B+. And that was when a B+ was a 92. So technically still an A, right? A 92 was a B+. So it was a B+ in history because I didn't like to read, which is crazy because now, I'm going to do this. I have books everywhere in my house. I love reading. I love writing. I tell people jokingly, but it is true. I didn't speak until I was 2, and I didn't like to read. I didn't read a full book until I was 26. I read parts of books, but never full books until I was 26. And now
what was the first full book?
It was a David Sedaris book that a friend of mine actually gave me. And I can't remember if it was called Naked or Me Talk Pretty one day, but I think it might have been her way to shove the book in my mouth and make me stop talking to her or something. It was one of my friends from college, actually. And then after that, what really got me was that something that I felt very important about, and then I do want to go back to the why, so let's circle back to that too, is that when we would go overseas, I had teammates who would take their computer, or take some sort of device. They could watch whatever Netflix series or something like that they were really into at the time. I never did that because it was just something extra to carry, and I didn't want to lose it. And the importance of that is that meant I wasn't on social media. I wasn't watching things that were digital. When we would travel, in the Olympic year, we went to Germany for a month. Before we went, about 3.5 weeks, and then we went and raced a World Cup and before we came home. So we were in Europe for a month, which was really kind of awesome, which sounds like a lot, but compared to most other countries around the world, they spend the entire summer in Europe, which is also pretty awesome. But I started reading. What else do you have to do? Right? If you don't know the language, or you don't know enough of the language to watch whatever game show in Italian it is. I say that because I just got back from coaching in Italy, which is actually pretty entertaining, and I'm teaching myself Italian. But you end up reading a lot because you have a lot of downtime. Your job is to recover because you are so tired from what you're doing that if you allow any bit of your energy to go anywhere else, to leak anywhere, whether it's social media or to some movie that you end up in your brain going like, oh, what if this thing, and you start to feel it, or you looking at pictures from someone else's trip somewhere and you are where you are, you start to question what you're doing. But there was never even an opportunity for that. There was never a doubt about where we wanted to be, simply because for me, I'm reading books that keep me in my bed in my place until my alarm goes off and it's time for practice again, or it's time for lunch, or it's time to go for the walk around the lake or something, which is much more mindful and really, really interesting. Because I mean, the way that we got to explore cities sometimes too, just because like if we raced in Switzerland, you have to walk from the hostel, we stayed in hostels, to the bus stop to catch the bus to go to the race course. We weren't getting chauffeured. It was like, take the city bus and then take it 3 stops and get off to the point where you do it enough times that you've memorized the stops along the route. You're like, oh, here we go. Okay. Yeah. But to go back to that why of what really drove me into the sport and through the sport, because of where it met me in my life, where I was staying up all night, I had gained 20 or 30 pounds. I was 20 or 30 pounds heavier than I'd ever been in my life. I was, by national standards, unfit. I couldn't run a mile without stopping to walk. When I first started rowing the 45-pound bar, I was like, how do you lift this? This is crazy. And this is someone who I had been an athlete all growing up, like a dozen sports or so. It's not like I had sat on a bump somewhere doing nothing. I had done I grew up in the country. I climbed trees, jumped over creeks, fell in the mud. So I had had a pretty physical childhood, but where I was without those sports was not a person or place that I wanted to be. And so rowing entered my life in a way that it was the reset. It was the catalyst to every good thing that has happened in my life since. And at the time, because I was in that first, by the time that I went from the day that I walked into my first practice to the Olympic podium was 6 years. It was 3 years to my first world championships. So that was a pretty quick trajectory. And it was allowing me to develop into a better person. And so it wasn't just about the finish line. It was literally me being better, which is really exciting. And that, to me as a coach, I've come to say, my job is not to entertain you, right? My job, the most entertaining thing, is to help you improve and progress. Progress is the most interesting, entertaining thing. And when it's relative to you and what you as an athlete want out of it, you will do anything for that, because that's your survival, right? That's what we instinctually want as humans, is to be better.
And I think in that case, it's like there's the quote, if I remember correctly, it's when the pain of staying the same outweighs the pain of growing. So that's a very similar situation right there.
Yeah.
It's like,
yes. It's funny how you can take an entire 5-minute conversation, but yeah, distill it into that.
Yeah.
It's a great line, and that's exactly it.
Yeah. So you said that your first world championship came 3 years after you started rowing. So from what I researched, that some of world championships went not so great, some went really well.
Yeah.
I do know that you guys got the world record in England, and then you were also Henley champions.
Yep.
So going into the Olympics, you had a very successful couple of races. Mm-hmm. Was there pressure to win the Olympics? How did your boat handle it, and how did you handle it?
Yeah, and this is something that I need to figure out how to find this out of the archives, but there's actually a documentary done on every single Olympic Games, and they were usually showcased on Showtime after a while. And before we even won the Olympics, the people that were doing the documentary selected not just a rowing, but our boat as one of the spotlights. So they had to do a 2-hour special about the entire Olympics, and then they spotlight literally 5 individual events, not sports, literally events. Jason Lezak as a human swimming, Nastia Lukin as a gymnast and they chose our women's 8. So there are some really interesting lines in the interviews with me and my teammates in that, because it's about 20 to 25 minutes long. But in those years leading up to it, we went to my first world championships and got our butts kicked. we won the first 1850 meters in the 8. You know, I raced the pair and the 8 that year, which was pretty awesome. I literally almost got cut from the team multiple times. The national team coach actually told my college coach that he didn't think it was going to work out for me. And about 6 months later, I was the fastest starboard in the country and one of the fastest scullers during my career. Once I did actually start sculling, periodically you would go from one side, either sweeping or sculling every now and again. And for some reason, I was very slow at sculling until I was no longer very slow at sculling.
And just to interject, sweeping,
yes.
that's 1 oar, and then sculling is 2 oars a person.
Yes. And so we lost that first World Championships where it looked like we were tracking to come home with 2 medals. And a couple of the coaches that were there actually said to us, how does it feel to know that you're going to come home with 2 medals at your first World Championships? And my pair partner and I were like, what do you mean? You know, that's cool. Wouldn't that be amazing? And then we got 4th in the 8 and 6th in the pair, and 4th by, you know, a matter of feet out of 2nd place. You know, 4 boats in the race, it might have even been 5, broke 6 minutes. It was very fast conditioned, but even so, it was very tight racing. But then after that, the very next year is when we basically pushed the reset button and we won the Henley. We set every record to every marker and the overall record. We beat the British team by 2.5 lengths. We beat the Dutch by almost easily, which is like 4 lengths or more, something like that year. And then we went to the World Championships and swept that and broke the world record and went 5:55.5 there in very, very choppy conditions. But that's just 1 year, right? And and World Cups, we won a bunch of World Cups along the way. You know, I got to race at 8 World Cups during my career, and we won. We either got first or second at most of those, and when we would race the 8. And then 2007 was our next World Championships. There we go. We won that again by a very narrow margin. And I comment on this in the book, is that if you look at the trajectory, Romania was the country. And this is what's so interesting now is everybody's like, oh, the Dutch. And I'm like, did you miss that the Italians and the Romanians are never far? The Romanians are always winning medals at the Olympics for the last 50 plus years, but no one unpacks them because they don't realize it. But if you look at Italy, France, and the Romanians, they are the ones that now people are rowing like, right? That all of a sudden it's this new fancy thing. It's just that the Dutch went and unpacked it and actually started doing it now. So it's a recency bias is the phrase. There is a lot of really cool racing. If you look basically from, you know, women's rowing became an Olympic sport in 1976, but you're going to have the best footage from the mid 80s all the way up through the kind of early to mid 2000s. But if you really look in even through the 90s and early 2000s, 96, 2000, and 2004, that'll show you some really probably familiar racing styles, right? That are not fancy and new, but they are fast. But Romania had won 3 Olympic gold medals in the women's 8, 96, 2000, 2004. And when they won in 2004, 2 of those women raced in the pair and won it by open water. They walked through the United States. So one of my teammates, our coxswain, Mary Whipple, in that interview that she did for that Showtime documentary, her comment was, the trend of the past however many years, 20 years, was that Romania goes to the Olympics and wins. The United States goes and comes home with nothing. And so the Olympics is a very different animal compared to a World Championships or a World Cup, and certainly compared to a national championship. You know, there are countries that don't show all of their cards until the Olympic year or the year before, because athletes will stay around for numerous Olympic cycles. So go to 5, you know, 4, 3, 4, 5, possibly even 6 Olympics, you know, in their single sport, where they can't do all the training. You shouldn't, right? As you age, you need more time to recover. So they do things differently. They do something different for 2 years. And then in the 2 years leading up to the Olympics, they come back, which allows them to gain speed. In my book, I comment where in the year that we broke the world record, we beat the Romanians by a handy amount, like almost 10 seconds or something. I don't remember off the top of my head now, but it's the actual time is in the book. And then the very next year at the World Championships, we beat them by barely a second. So they made
I think you said like 1.3 or something like that.
They made up multiple boat lengths in a year. So if that trajectory tracked, that meant that they were going to beat us by like at least 2 or 3 boat lengths by the time the Olympics rolled around. So no matter how much confidence you have, you can never take for granted what someone else might have, what their strategy was. You know, you just have to keep your eye on doing the thing that you're aiming for. Something that was really powerful for us when we were training is that we weren't training to beat them. We were training to do something that no one had ever done before. So as soon as we broke the world record, it was interesting because from my first world championships to my second one, all of a sudden we started having speeds to train off of rather than just kind of a general effort. So we had effort and speed, and our speeds were based on world best times. And as soon as we broke the world record, it didn't mean that our training speed was based on our world best time. It was based on a speed that was almost an entire boat length faster than our world best time. So we took that needle and went, okay, we did that. Now let's move it way out here and reset all of the speeds that we're going to train on, not just for that boat, but all of them. So we were training not just on world best times, but we're talking world best times. So yes, we were training on world best times.
And to interject, so the length, it depends on the length of a boat, but for eights, it's 60 meters, correct?
You mean the length of the boat?
Yeah, because when you say a boat length, so...
Oh, yeah, feet.
Yeah. Feet. Oh, feet.
Yes,
60
feet. Yes, feet. Yep. And then thereabouts. Some are a little bit longer, some a little bit shorter. Most are somewhere just below 60 feet or so. And the 8 itself weighs almost 200 pounds. And a single, on the other hand, is about 30 feet, just under it, and right just under 30 pounds. Right? It's a really interesting kind of range between the two.
Yeah. So earlier you mentioned how even as a coach or when looking at a team, if you have 20 different people with 20 different characteristics, putting them together in an 8. In your experience, how did you handle that team aspect of an 8 with all those different personalities and characteristics?
So
and then zoom in. Oh,
go ahead, please.
And then zoom in out. How does this look like with teams outside of rowing?
Yeah, when I first was contemplating retiring, to go to the piece about teams outside of rowing first. When I was first contemplating retiring, I called up several of my trusted older teammates who had retired prior to me. Either teammates that did not make the team and had retired prior to, or people that knew because they had gone to another Olympics or knew that they were just going to be done after that one Olympics anyway. They had made the decision before we even raced. And we just had some really good, heartfelt conversations about that, be sure. And one of my friends who I'd rowed in college with, who ended up not making the Olympic 8, she's the Molly in the book. She's very crucial. She taught me how to row as well. She still teaches me how to row. She said, Shoopy, right? Shoop, you will never find this many driven people in one cluster again in your life. When you get into a job, you might find one or two, but you will not find this many people that are this capable of committing to something all in one place. So make sure that you're really sure about that thing that you want to do, right? Before you step out of it. And so that's where, you will find when I stepped out of it, I think to a certain extent, I am a glass half full person. So not that to a certain extent that I am for sure a glass half full person, but to a certain extent, what you get is what you see, right? So what you see is the thing. So what you're perceiving something to be is what it actually is. So for me, when I stepped out of rowing, I actually moved to Miami. I was living in Miami. I ended up down in Miami for, I've been down in Florida for almost 15 years now. But I immediately thought, my God, Olympians walk among us every day. You just have to have a conversation and recognize what it truly means to be an Olympian, right? There are qualities and characteristics in the Olympic creed that people that don't have some medal to show for it embody sometimes more than a lot of Olympians do. And you can look that up. What is that? What is the Olympic spirit? What are those traits? And you might even find people with gobs of medals that don't have any idea what those actually mean. So when you really unpack them, you can look at it and go, what are there people in my life that are like this in terms of how they positively influence the world without even realizing that they're positively influencing the world? So then to go back into the boat, I came to find out down the line, had a reunion number of years when the World Championships was here in Sarasota. I live in Sarasota. When the World Championships was back on American soil in Sarasota, Florida in 2017, there was a big reunion for the national team. And when we got together, a bunch of my old teammates and I, semantics, we all got together at a friend's house here locally, and I had gone in to take a shower after a row, and it was interesting because I came out and everybody's staring at me, and I'm like, what's happening, guys? Why are you staring at me right now? And the woman whose house it was, she said, Linz, we've just been talking. You're the connector. And it wasn't something that I did intentionally or really thought about, but they were all friends with each other. But the reason why they were all there was because of me. Because I said, hey, because I stayed in touch with all of them. And some of them stayed in touch with each other, but not the full thing. Like the common characteristic among everybody was me. So when I got into boats, because of how I was raised, because of the person I've kind of always been, I practiced. A friend of mine, I did a book club book talk a few years ago, and she said, you might not have specialized in a sport, but you specialized in teams. So most of the sports I played growing up were team sports. And it's all, even from like third grade, I played basketball. And those sports are very specifically designed a certain way. Sometimes parents will look and say, like, why are my kids playing sharks and minnows over there? That actually teaches social skills. There are certain critical thinking, problem solving skills that you learn from different games and sports. It's very intentional. And some people use them without realizing that there are things that you should and can very intentionally teach. So then I just carried that from one team to the next until I got to the national team. And when I started rowing as a novice, I was spring semester, my junior year in college. So by the time I started rowing, I was 20 years old and everyone else already knew how to row. Every single person except there was literally one other person. And then she ended up not staying on the team after that for very long. So it was just me. And so the directive, and I talk about this in my book, was if you have any questions, ask your teammates. So I learned very early on that I didn't know that much about the sport, and my best opportunity for speed was to recognize who was going fast and chase them down or do whatever it was that they were doing. And that was something that allowed me to kind of just work really well with people, I think. And by virtue of being a glass half full and pretty new, so I was humble, that, and believe you me, the single will humble you. Going slow will humble you, right? Nearly flipping in one of the biggest races of your life will humble you. So just when you start to get a little confidence, that's when you pretty much almost flip when you're rowing in a single. But over the years, that allowed me to kind of just put that into the boats that I was in. Just it was a habit that I had developed from a young age without even realizing it that I then put into the boats. And you know, when you're in a pair, we used to always joke that when it was going well, you got a new best friend, and when it wasn't, it was like you hated even your best friend at that point. You got a worst enemy, you know. When a boat's going well, you love the worst person on the planet. When it's not going well, the best person on the planet is just, you know, dead to you. But interestingly enough, you need different personalities, right? So not everybody on the team was maybe like that as much as I had been but I didn't realize that at the time, you know. And on the day that I was told by our coach that I made the Olympic 8, he did not tell me it was because I am this tall person or I have this big ERG score or it's this thing. He said to me, and there's a reason why I wrote these lines in my book. You know, he started with, well, don't tell me that your teammates didn't tell you, right? It was a joke. He was funny. He goes, well, you made the boat. I knew you were going to. And I'm thinking to myself, my God, I would have been so much less stressed for the last month at minimum had I known the way you felt this whole time. But he said, you've been consistent. You've done everything I've asked. And the line that to this day strikes me more than anything else is, and you have a strong sense of team. And that he saw that. And I think that was the one reason why he didn't cut me in that first year when he really could have, because I was that slow, but he didn't. There was that first year as well, my second pre-elite camp, he could have cut me. He sent home all of my boatmates except me and kept me around as the spare to go to Canadian Henley. And if you're going to go, you might as well race these events that you're allowed to race. Sure, you've never raced more than 1,000 meters in a single, but you might as well go and race the highest level boat race at Canadian Henley, the champ single. Might as well do that. Yeah, why jump into the hardest thing that you can possibly do there while you're there? You're going to be there anyway. But and to this day, I'm like, what was the thought that made him keep me around? And maybe it was because he saw that I was willing to do whatever needed to be done, and I would jump in when they needed me. So maybe he was just like, she'll be the ultimate spare. We can use her wherever. No big deal, you know? Maybe that was it. And so maybe it was like, Shoop's still here all these years later. How did that happen? But that team-oriented nature, you know, is the thing that really, because in an 8, you cannot, and I talk about this in this book, you cannot wail on it and expect the boat to go faster. You must match and go with everyone at that exact moment and land on the footboard at the exact moment as everyone else. And when you do that, that is, it's amazing, right? Like it's amazing what happens when a boat does that. But you have to be willing to let go of yourself a little bit to be able to do it, and trust the people around you.
Yeah. So when you were saying with the glass half full, you perceive it. So when you perceive something, it kind of becomes your reality. I feel like that is very true with anything. There is a quote in here, if I can find it.
I think there are a couple of quotes in there.
there's a few.
I got to say, Andre, when I read that book, I start getting into it and I get drawn in, and I think, my God, I wrote this.
Yeah.
It's like an out-of-body experience.
Yeah. It was earlier. It was on like page 15 when when Tom, the head coach of a women's national team at the time, said, "You must see it, then convince your body of what your mind can see."
Yes.
And that's exactly what you're talking about with the perceiving, where it's like once you like see it, that's when you can truly achieve.
Yes. And not question it. You know, that really is the law of attraction right there. And that is something that exists very much in my life, that I have met people here in Sarasota specifically who are rowers that believe in that so strongly, because, I mean, to the extent that, you know, I know someone who is literally like, how can I not? I have manifested, you know, trips to Cabo for groups of 10 just by saying, so when are you going to call me with the with how I sign up for my flights? So these types of things that, you know, when you literally, and he went so far as to say, like, you know, you have to see it and to build that image in your mind to the point where you can smell it and taste it and truly visualize it. The better you're able to see it. You know, my brother helped me realize that early on, it doesn't have to be concrete. It just needs to be some vague, fuzzy sketch of that thing. And then as you train, and this was another thing Tom told us, and that was the difference maker between the loss at the World Championships and then the never losing again. I mean, the women's 8 did not lose for the next 11 straight years. Okay. And that was really like, how did we train changed? And there was a really good nucleus of athletes at the time that had their heads on their, you know, shoulders, right? That preparation is confidence. So you have this idea, you convince your body of what your mind can see, but the training every day and your consistency in that preparation, which is the training and then the self-care, sleeping well, feeding your mind with really positive, reassuring thoughts and hobbies, friends, environment, whatever your intake happens to be, that then solidifies your fact that you're like, well, I'm still me, I'm still here, I'm still healthy, and I have 2 extra years of training. Wow, I must be better. You know, the very, very kind of quantifiable improvements that you can really help build your confidence, which then makes that picture a little clearer. Like that you're, you know, if you read about flow, you talk about like the confidence interval relative to the challenge itself. And as you prepare more, your confidence will increase relative to the challenge. Your skill relative to the challenge will increase, and so then your confidence grows.
It's because like the whole idea is with the same thing. It's like with confidence, like you keep on waiting until you're like, oh, when I'm this person, I'll be confident. All that things is like, you got to take the action now. You got to build this yourself. And
I got to tell you, here I am. I'm sitting here, and I got to tell you this is there was a line that I wanted to build in this book so badly, but it just doesn't fit. Right? Is that you'll probably find that your parents were not too wrong, right? They were probably right about a lot of things. Wait till, and I'm like, dad nabbit, they were right about some things. But no matter how confident you become, you always will have some sort of imposter syndrome. And anybody that says they don't is, in my opinion, lying, right? Because you, as a human, and this, because I've seen this in so many really good, like people that win the Olympics, people that focus on mastery of the sport, people that focus on getting a little better each day. That's all that mastery is. Because how do we make tangible something that is intangible? You know, I'm not a master. I'm not a goat. There's no mastery. It is literally getting better, because who's to say that mastering rowing isn't the most technically precise stroke? Because the fastest on the planet isn't necessarily the most technically precise. They just have the right amount of fitness and just enough technique. So we really are trying. It's like again, circular conversation. Like Plato's, a perfect table. In this, we're constantly searching for that thing as far as mastery is concerned. And I forget why I went down that rabbit hole for you.
Don't worry.
I remember the imposter syndrome. Sorry about that. So
yes.
That you will always have that, because there's always something that you could learn. As I've been coaching for almost 16 years now. Almost 16 years now. And every day I learn something, because you're in a different environment, right? And every time you end up with a new person in the sport, someone that has a different level of skill, something that you have tried to teach them and help them understand, you realize that in this particular amount of time that I have, this is a unique situation. What can I teach them in this time allotted to get them from rowing arms only to quarter slide, right? In an 8.
Yeah.
All right. So you're constantly learning things, in terms of how to be better at the sport. Coaching can help you become even better at the sport because you have to then really think about what helped make the boat go and then articulate that.
All right, then I'll jump to the question about coaching I have.
Oh, sure.
We're on the topic.
Sure.
So being both an athlete and now a coach too, what is one thing you think most athletes need from a coach that they don't normally get?
Gosh, I think that thankfully, it's easy to assume that people aren't getting the thing that they need. I think that culture is so often underrated, and that there are more studies as the overall culture changes that what drives culture shifts. But to a certain extent, coaches have kind of taken themselves out of the equation or think that they are not the ones that drive culture, but they do have a significant hand in culture and accepting culture. Because if you, and this is something that has hindered the U.S. women's national team for a number of years, is the athletes do shape the culture. But that also means you need to have the right athletes around. It's very hard to do at the national team level because if someone's fast enough, then you can't cut them like you can on another team, or you can't not recruit them like you can in college or for a high school team, mostly the college level, to shape your culture very intentionally. I think that there are certain coaches out there that are very intentional about that in terms of culture shifting or shaping. And I think that is something that is very much does start with the coach's responsibility, and then make sure that they are empowering the right athletes and not always getting blindsided by ERG scores and size and potential. When I first started coaching, it was very important to me, and this is something that because it worked so quickly, that there is proof in the concept that when you reward the behaviors that you need to make the team go, the team really takes off. I worked with a team very early on in my career that had all the parts, but it wasn't coming together. And then basically all that we did was put it in their hands, said, hey, if you come to practice and put in the work, you're going to get better. And the more that you do that, and you do these very simple things, not just an erg, and definitely not just a seat race. I very much believe that seat racing is a last resort just to check if two people are very tight in, in where they've been all season long and how they've demonstrated who they are to you and to their teammates. That they can accumulate information that helps you know who are they every single day, not just as races close in. And when a coach can really stand by that, it makes their job a lot easier. Honestly, it's much less confusing, because then the athletes themselves really can be in control of their progress, and you're not lying to them about that. And that really instills and rewards, again, even if it's just like hey, here's an example of how it would reward certain behavior. There was a person on this particular team who was always, whenever there was extra time, sweeping out the boat bays and picking up slings and just doing those small things, picking up trash. And I don't know that anybody else noticed it, but whenever we would debrief with the entire team, guys and girls squads after practice, I would say, I told you guys we weren't going to have captains. We didn't have captains that particular year. And I said, but if I were to pick someone, this person, and here's why. Right? Because of these things that these people are doing, is what's really making a difference. And when those people disappear, it's interesting how the culture, the team identity, the whatever you want to call it, whatever words you want to use, really do shift. That's a long way to say behavior, right? Look beyond the ERG score and the potential just because someone is built a certain way, and make sure that the behaviors that are really positive, you're reinforcing those, because today it's very easy for the right people to get overlooked.
Yeah. Back to what you were saying about mastery, the just getting a little better every day. Mm-hmm. It's the same thing. It's what you said, what they do every day.
Yes.
It's if you have someone, my old coach used to say this, it's if I have a guy who comes to practice one day, pulls a 6:20 2K, which is a very fast 2K for high schoolers, for the audience who don't know rowing, but then doesn't show up for the whole year.
Yes.
Expects me to put him in the top boat. It's not going to work out.
And that unfortunately is more common than it should be. And it's easy to get sidetracked by that. But as soon as I see that, I'm but that's not the person that, because if I watch them waffle on 9 2Ks or skip or they're sick, it is much more likely that they're going to show up and do nothing in the third 500 when it really hurts. But the people that are there, and this is something I talk about in the book, it's like when you're sitting at the start line of the Olympic Games, or any race for that matter, that is the biggest race of your life. Your first race might just be the biggest race of your life because it's the first race. You know, that when you're sitting at that start line, when you've been to practice with those people so many times, and it, depending on where you live, like if you're in Florida, it's god awful hot. It's like all these things that happen. It's so humid. There's so many mosquitoes. It's super hot. You're sweating. If you're in, Canada or you're in Massachusetts and it's ice and cold and your hands are cracking and you're shivering, but you're still there. That's the easiest decision you ever made. The training is the hard part. The racing is the fun part. It's the payoff. So when you sit there, yes, you're going to be nervous. You care about it. That's the point. Being nervous is cool. It's an important biological reflex. That means your body is like, yes, you care. I'm going to give you a little more today. Let's just make sure we know how to manage that. All right. Let's stay organized. So, sitting there and being nervous about this thing, like you made the yes all those times when you got up in the dark, when you had to go buy more Band-Aids, when you didn't have a snack or you ran out of water at practice, which, by the way, you people over the years have asked me, wow, you're always so prepared. And I'm like, yeah, that's because I have been in need of a Band-Aid. I have been tired. I have been hungry. I have been thirsty. I have been hot. I have been wet. Yeah. Made sure that wouldn't happen too many times before I was prepared for this situation. Exactly.
So you mentioned when you're at the start line of a race. So what were you thinking at the start line of a 2008 Olympic medal race? Aside from hoping your teeth don't fall out.
Yes, but aside from hoping my teeth don't, and I still have them. They're all still here. Turns out that is a biological thing too. Like why you feel the throb, why you taste the metallic stuff in your mouth. I've actually was thinking about this earlier today. I was like, oh man, maybe the first few paragraphs of the first chapter of my book could be a poem, right? Because it's everything that you do think when you're sitting there, and the way that I say it is my nerves momentarily resurged. I'm sitting there and all those things are flashing through your mind. Like everything and nothing all at once is sitting there is because you know that it's all built up to that particular moment where you've been sitting at that start line. And I thought, my God, this is so scary. I can't believe I'm sitting here right now. My only choice is to race harder than I've ever gone because it's not like I can get out and be like, psych, can someone else race this for me? Like I had that instant moment. Like, oh God, I'm actually here. But then it goes away because you're like, yeah,
I'm actually here.
I was living in an expensive town, paying rent, living in a room with no closet that had a closet pole that scared me in the middle of the night one night because it broke off the wall, under the weight of my clothes. My roommates and I, we were so poor that we would sleep in hoodies under quilts with space heaters and still could barely afford to pay the electrical bill, I was coupon clipping and shopping certain sales. And if we did go out to eat, it was like, I'll have the water. Thank you, because it's free, And then you just look at whatever costs $10 on the menu. And you're like, I don't like hamburgers, but I guess I'll have a hamburger or a chicken sandwich, or get whatever's on special. That all of those decisions, all of that, wow, I went through all of that and I said yes to that. This was so worth it to me that I was willing to live like that for all those years. How could I not just be the best that I can possibly be? And something I reflect on very much is I remember very distinctly, and I put this in this book for a reason as well, is that when we were warming up for our Olympics, for the Olympic final, we're going through our typical warm-up. It was the same every time. And whenever Mary would call for us to do a builder, right, which is build with the legs, go for 10, 15, 20 strokes, whatever it was that she was asking for us to do to go from easier pressure to full tilt boogie at the specific stroke rate, which again is how many strokes you're taking per minute. It was almost like in my mind, I was like, she is only talking to me and I am the one person in here that needs to figure out how to go harder right now. And I would even use those things, just an individual builder in a warm-up, to test just how hard I could go, right? Can I get my muscles to rev up any harder here? And it was, okay, as soon as those were done, they're out. All right, how about a little more? Can I get a little harder? And can I actually go a little harder so we can go a little bit faster? Match my teammates, but can I push even more than what my previous cap was? And the way that I felt about it was that if we nailed our warm-up, that actually made us an even better crew than the one that left the dock. And that is a lesson that I talk to athletes, every athlete that I've worked with since, is you've got another 45 minutes to get better. technique is interesting because you can have those things can click into place from one stroke to the next, which is pretty cool. And so if you continue to search for that feeling, that sensation, that perfect stroke, even in your warm-up for a race, you can be a faster person or a faster crew depending on the boat that you're rowing. You know, if you're in a single, it's just you. I guess you would still call you a crew, but you can be a faster boat, faster team by the time you 45 minutes later get to the start line.
Yeah. And you were talking about there, you say it in the book perfectly. It's one of my favorite quotes is the yes, more.
Yeah. The yes, more is really interesting because I tried to say no fear one year at a World Cup. I was testing my language in my mind. You shouldn't have a million words flooding through your mind when you're actually racing. Keep it very simple. That way there's no room for doubt to hop in there and be like, hold up, this is really hard. Are you sure you want to do this? If you pick 2 words that are positive only, that is going to work for you better because the brain psychologically, when you're in distress, it doesn't like process the no. It doesn't process the contraction. So if I hear don't wait, then all I'm going to hear is actually the verb part, the wait. Yeah. If you say no fear, and this was the race where I felt like my teeth almost fell out. If you say no fear, what your brain will do is it will chant to you very rhythmically along with the stroke rate, no, fear, no, the whole way down the course. So about 45 seconds into that race, I was like, well, I need to write this down in my training logs to never say that again in my brain. But I had practiced it even down to the point of what I was going to say in my head that I couldn't get rid of it. Once I discovered yes, more by practicing it in practices week after week and then carrying it into World Cups, which were also technically practices, and World Championships, those were practices for the Olympics. They were, I think I refer to them as dress rehearsals, for the next big stage. By then, it is so baked into your psyche, if you black out, it doesn't matter. I was a hurt locker athlete. I didn't have the capacity to drop the hammer at the end of a race. Our coach told me during a race one point when he was shaking our hands as we shoved from the dock to race a race, he said, you take care of the middle, the others will get you across the line. Because he knew that I was going to go as hard as I could right away because that was my only option. And what that meant was that at most 45 seconds into the race was about as far as I would get before I would pretty much black out. I don't remember much about any race, little snippets here and there until we get back to land and other people start talking about them. And then I'm like, oh, yeah, I think I remember that.
I know that same feeling where it's like during the race, it's like, I guess that happened.
Yeah.
I don't remember it, but sure.
Yeah. Good for you.
So what about right after the Olympic race and then when you were standing there on the medal dock watching the American flag go up with the anthem?
There are some great shots of us on that dock, actually, from NBC. At the time, rowing was one of the few sports that had the podium gear waved. You would literally finish the race, cross the line, and immediately go there. You're still shaking. Your body hasn't physically recovered, which is a very fortunate reality to live in because it's raw. You can't go and think and process and consider how you feel. It is just literally your immediate reaction to what just happened. And there's shaking, and there are tears, and there are, and there's actually, it's really funny when they used this footage in our, in that documentary that I mentioned, where the woman that gave us our medals is a woman named Anita de France. And she is a pioneer in American women's rowing. That's what I call her, and that's what one of my teammates actually referred to her as well. And that's kind of where I got that from. She was in the 76 Olympics. She has been a part of the International Olympic Committee for a very long time. She is still very much involved at the highest level, not just in our sport, but at the Olympics. And she comes up to me. I was the second to last person that received my medal. And I'm watching, and I'm clapping, and I'm all happy my teammates are getting their medals. This is so cool. We just won the Olympics. I can't believe it just happened. And then this woman that I look up to is standing before me with this other woman holding a tray with the medal on it, because they carry them on trays. And they actually have a thing where they give you the medal first, then they shake your hand because it's an Olympic thing. They want you to have your medal as soon as possible. And that's kind of the reward. And she kind of grabs my hand, and I was fine. I wasn't crying until that point. But as soon as she looked me in the eyes and starts talking to me, she basically said, your life is forever changed. And when that happened, it was literally like a fairy godmother moment where the thing, as soon as the lasso went over my head, it was almost like you felt like the fairy stardust trickle down the back of your neck. It was the craziest sensation. especially once that medal then hit my stomach, it was much longer and much heavier than any of the World Championship or World Cup medals that we had won in previous years. And so we had grown accustomed to like just this kind of metal trinket. And then all of a sudden this thing that's actually made of gold and silver, it's a silver with a gold plate now, but it's actually made of precious metals, and it's hung on silk. And there's a whole major ceremony in a very foreign country. And that just makes it a whole separate reality. And I started bawling, and I think I sang the last line maybe of the national anthem by the time I was like done sniffing. Hopefully everybody watches that part of this. See me sniffing, right? Like that you kind of, and it's true, because one of the biggest things about doing something like that, and this goes for anything that you do in your life, is that humans adapt. And what that moment did is that I am a very sensitive person. I love to stare at the sunrise. I love to listen to the water. I love the sound of the rain and the trees. And so I've been very perceptive about that since a very young age. And those things helped me be better at rowing. When I started rowing in college, I remember being mesmerized by the way the water sounded against the side of the boat. And then I remember thinking, I'm going to look at it because then I can see it passing. And you can see the sun glinting. And that was interesting. And it helped me move at the right pace. Of course, at the time I was yelled at for looking out of the boat. And I'm like, but then when I rowed with the national team, I was told to do that. Interesting, right? Because it helps you fold in with that. So for me, I already had kind of this like spidey sense up here in terms of the things that how I used the natural environment to help me be better at the sport. Winning the Olympic Games will take that and then just amplify it so that it is the most sensitive microphone you can possibly have. Right? So then it takes your capacity for anything you ever thought that you could do or feel or think and raises that limit. And that is where it starts to get a little bit dangerous, honestly, right? Because you have to really recognize why you're doing something and not get caught up in that moment as being the catalyst, the cause of that sensation, and recognize that that sensation is more tied to who you are and why you've done this thing and the process, and not just the end point, because there's always going to be another end point.
It's all of a process. That's the biggest part. Like you said earlier, it's simply a byproduct.
Yes.
So part of the process I know for rowing and racers in general is they typically have a ritual or routine. Mm-hmm. What are some of the rituals and routines you did while rowing, and do you use some of them outside of a sport now, like before talks or interviews?
Yeah, I tell you, so there were a bunch of things that I learned, especially when I started doing more public speaking and when I was in grad school and I was looking at studying longevity in the aging athlete. So I did a master's in exercise physiology at the University of Miami. When I started coaching, initially it started as reading individual pieces of research. My teammate, Erin in the book, Erin Cafaro, has since gone on and done a doctorate in psychology, but she was one of the first of my teammates who started reading about like, oh, if you eat walnuts, it does this thing, right? Here's why they're good for you, and it was like, oh, that's interesting. And then another teammate, Anna Michelson, who's now Anna Cummins, she's the Anna C in the book, or the Anna M in the book, actually. She was like flaxseed and fish oil, these things that started popping up. And so then I started reading more about that. It was Erin that was doing the research, Anna that was kind of applying these things. So then when I started coaching, I started doing more research. They inducted us into the Hall of Fame. That made me think, hey, you know what? I am still good at this. I want to go back and train. So I started doing more research. And when I started doing more research, that's when I started to think, gosh, like it's much more interesting for me to learn this stuff to help other people get better. So then that's what led me down the rabbit hole of getting a master's in exercise physiology. So the biggest things, apart from the self-talk, and it's how I take care of myself leading into an event. So everything that I did, I've recorded audiobooks for myself and other people. I've done major, Fortune 500 and 100 company public speaking, large groups, groups of 10 all the way up to 500 or more. I've gotten to do commentary at the highest level for NBC, done the last 2 Olympics there. So you're on a stage. You have to realize. One of the scariest moments that was very similar to sitting at the start line of the Olympic Games was after I wrote this book, poured my heart and soul and hours of labor into building it. The night before it released, I thought, oh my God, people could hate this. That never dawned on me until the night before. And I'm like, well, I can't push stop now. But the things that helped me manage that outside, and then I'll go back to the superstition, is the 5 key things that I did that helped me stay healthy. People started asking me, what was your special diet? What supplements do you take? Do you do this? I did not drink coffee until I retired. I never drank coffee. Nope. That meant that I slept really, really well. It also meant that I digested my food really, really well. I did not disrupt my gut microbiome. These are things that I've learned after. It was like I discovered these things that actually were very scientifically founded, right? So didn't drink coffee. I have never been a huge meat eater my entire life. So I have never been like, I must eat this much protein. Never in my entire life. And I have spent a lot of time, I got sick twice in 7.5 years, when I was training. And so basically fully depleted. Twice I got sick. So the 5 key things I call them the big 5 to thrive. Sleep. I slept better than just about everyone else on the team. Drink, hydration. Eat, lots of colors, not just protein. If you overeat one thing, it's going to push everything else off of your plate. I've always been big into vegetables. I have some information that I can send to you as well if you're interested in it, kind of like some really important foods, because when I was in grad school studying nutrition, I actually did a deep dive into a project, surveyed thousands and thousands of pieces of research of what does make our bodies physically stronger. And then basically...
Yeah, I'd love that research if you could send it over.
I turned it into, basically the most important piece of it is not just like, oh, copper is for this and that's that. It's, here are a bunch of foods that contain all these things that we need. Try and fold them into your diet is pretty much how that looks. So sleep, drink, eat, the movement piece. So exercise, yes. But also if you're a rower, so you're already exercising, you've got to warm up, cool down, and lift really, really well. Do not just go mess around on the erg. Always row the erg really, really well. Be very mindful of how you're moving at all times, okay? So taking care of the mobility, strengthening around it. So move means a lot of different things. If you're not exercising, it means exercise. If you're already exercising, make sure that you are warming up and stretching. That's at minimum. And then the last piece, I call it think because it rhymes. Sleep, drink, eat, move, think, right? Kind of rhymes nicely. The think piece is very much anything that helps you step away from the main thing in your life, whether it's school, a job, a family, sports. Having something other than that major focus is going to help you be better at that major focus. That's where my teammates and I would like go be silly on a Wednesday night or go do whatever it was on a Saturday, or we would like play practical jokes on the men's team, like dress in all black and do things to their car. Like, I mean, we would literally like play practical jokes on each other, because it was the light bit. I journaled a lot. So in that think piece, I always lump in making sure that you're journaling and writing things down every day. Even if you don't know how to write, just write, I don't know what I'm supposed to be writing right now. But writing down something that happened or how you actually feel, that is incredibly important because it gets the story out of your head and it frees up the space to get back to the task at hand. Sleep, drink, eat, move, think. There's actually, when you asked about that, it was funny because I was like, let's see, page 339 as I'm looking at this. That was one of my favorite ways to start a chapter. I literally said, I do not consider myself superstitious. However, I do, however, have certain things I do every day to help me perform my best. I do not understand, or I do not always have to understand why they work, nor does there necessarily need to be scientific proof that they should work. All that matters is that they do. And then, of course, I wouldn't want to jinx anything, especially not with 1 month to go before leaving for Beijing. So, I wasn't like you must flick the light switch 7 times after you leave. But I was someone who I liked to, if I would take a nap, I always liked to take a warm shower before I would go. So I'd get a warm shower, stretch, always brush my teeth. I put that in the book because I liked how it made me feel invigorated. And it turns out there's a lot of research about that. The menthol, it actually does invigorate you. I think that's part of the reason why people are so positive at Christmas, all the candy canes and peppermint lattes. Yeah. It's true. There's truth to it. And that's one thing. And in the book, there's a really funny story that I tell you I didn't know the answer to until last year, maybe. Do you remember the part where we're back in the back of the boatyard in China before we even get to our boat, and our coach breaks out a little water bottle, and he says that it's water from Lake Casitas. And for those who don't know, before we won the Olympics, which we were the first women to win the Olympics at the 2,000 meter race distance. That was the reason why they put us in the Hall of Fame the first time. They've put us in the Hall of Fame a second time since, so a few of us have been inducted too. Sometimes one of us, I think Karin's been in there a third time now at this point. But the women in 1984 won the Olympics at 1,000 meters. So in the 80s, women were only allowed to race 1,000 meters, and they crushed it. The United States won. But there were no gold medals between 84 and our games. So 24 years later was the first time that there was a gold medal for the women. For the men, it was 40 years, right? So 1964 to 2004, when those guys won. And that Olympic record still stands when few others, if any, still stand after Tokyo, because there was flow and tide, that nearly every Olympic record fell. But that men's 8, the U.S. men's 8, right, still had that record after Tokyo. So he comes out with this plastic water bottle, and he's not a superstitious type, but he told us it was water from Lake Casitas, where the women of 84 had won. And he pulled it out and he poured it over the bow of the boat. And I thought I was like, how did he get water from California without being taken away from him? He must have, but it was literally in like a Dasani bottle with the label torn off, and it said it on there, and it's this plastic bottle. And I'm like, that could be from down the street. It's probably got Giardia in it. Turns out one of the women from that Olympic 8, who was living in California at the time, got water from Lake Casitas, shipped it to another teammate, delivered it to Tom. However it got to him, I don't know. And I can't remember the exact story of the pathway, but that water that was poured on that bow of that boat was actually from Lake Casitas. And I didn't know it till more than 10 years after that race that it was actually true. Right?
Wow.
I even talked about it in the book. Like, it didn't matter if it was true or not, right? The idea, and that's the whole thing about a superstition. Didn't matter if it was actually true, but, couldn't help.
The placebo effect.
Or couldn't hurt. Exactly. So amazing the stories that do exist.
So I know from reading the book and with talking with you that you have faced a lot of challenges with rowing. Mm-hmm. What is the biggest challenge you faced, and how did you overcome it?
Oh gosh, I deciding to leave was, that's an easy. There are many, so it's hard to say which one is the biggest one. But that one was certainly one, because there's no right answer. Whichever answer you create, that you decide is the right one, and I've had teammates ask me in years since, like, would you go back and change anything, right? Do you regret anything? And cool, it would have been really cool to be a part of the boat that won. Most of my teammates, so the women that went and won again at the next Olympics, most of them were from our particular 8, and that's part of the reason why they won and why they rode halfway well, because they were a really good group of core athletes for that to carry on over to the next games. But I know, and I learned very early on, that I am not willing to sacrifice my personal health for something like that, because there are other ways to express the incredible human that each of us is capable of being. And breaking down my mind and my body to do that was not worth it to me, and there are people that do hang on and either never make it or get very close. They'll medal, but they won't win. But for some reason, they're like, you got to, whatever it is that drives them to do it, or maybe they just don't know any better or haven't discovered it for themselves, what that other talent is. I did a talk after one of the first public speaking. It was my second talk that I ever did, first one that I was ever asked to do. A woman that was in the Athens 8 who won an Olympic silver medal set it up for me. She now works at Google and has an amazing position with Google that they basically created for her with sports marketing worldwide. And she said to me after she got feedback about how I delivered what I said to that group for Johnson & Johnson. It was a global meeting for Johnson & Johnson. She said, when I heard about how things had gone, I knew you had other talents. And I never forgot that. That was a long time ago now at this point, honestly, but that has been really helpful, because I think some people might worry that they are a one-trick pony, when in reality, none of us is. It's just what you find that truly moves you, that you are willing to put that much focus into. I am a creative person. I love writing, right? I want to write more books. Well, you won't ever write a really good book if you don't sit down and focus on that and write that book and figure out how to do that, So that was one of the hardest challenges that I faced, because I was confronting psychological things that I'd never confronted before, and it was very confusing. And rowing had never hurt me before, and I was of an age that it never occurred to me that rowing could hurt me. This thing that I loved, that had done nothing for so many years but make me better, all of a sudden was like, wait a minute, this might not be good for me. No one told me that. How is that possible, right? So that was the biggest struggle, and that has also been the biggest blessing, because it taught me a lot about how when those things show up in life, because it doesn't just take physical training to cause those same biological responses to happen, because I saw them in my work life, and that has helped me keep the guardrails on of my work life, right? I'll stop there with that one. Yeah. So yeah.
I don't feel like what you're saying there, like the psychological side, sometimes those are more challenging because it's like you're exactly saying with rowing, it's like you never experience that with a sport.
Yes.
So it's like, that's shocking.
I think something, to go with that, right, to button that up, is that when, for me, and this was something that really helped, is because of how I did study longevity in the aging athlete when I was in grad school, is I was literally studying stress and stress load. And I was studying how the body doesn't know the difference, the brain doesn't know the difference between psychological stress and physical stress. It's just stress, and there is a limit for all of us. And what I found was that I hit that limit because of too much workload of like emails and phone calls and things to do and practices, and not enough sleep to help me manage all of that, not enough self-care, sleep, drink, eat, move, think to help me manage those things. All of a sudden, the same psychological musings were happening that I had experienced while overtraining as an athlete. So then it smacks me very obviously in the face, where I was like, wait a minute. It doesn't matter if it's too many meters at practice or too many emails at work. That can cause psychological overtraining. It's easier to go athletes overtrain. Yes, injury, psychology of that, it's a thing. Well, it happens for people even if you are not physically training, if the stress is high enough, right? And that we have to learn to respect a little bit. Recognize, not respect, but recognize that you don't have to be physically overtraining to actually overtrain. We call it burnout.
Yeah, burnout. So, being on the Olympic team, you were obviously part of a group of what many would consider elite athletes. Mm-hmm. What do you think separates good athletes from the elite ones? And do you think this is similar to successful people in life?
Yeah, people that make a decision to do something, and that they are... I've been asked a few times in my life so far, what is it that separates, right? So what are characteristics of high-level athletes? And there are, I can tell you, plenty of athletes that were way faster than me on the erg, but could not keep up on the water. And so it's not just that thing. And our coach was very good about not just leaning into, like, he would actually give us a score on certain things, but it wasn't just the erg. It was like, how did you perform on the water? How did you perform on the erg? Yes, those are there. It's rowing. Those are important. How are you in the weight room? How fast do you run on the track? How did you do on this thing, right? There were lots of single leg squat tests, right? So I actually started building things like that into teams that I was coaching, where I would even include stretching, right? So things like that. And then subjective measures that were like, are you that guy that's sweeping the boathouse? You're going to get an extra point for this, right? Like, let's talk about that. Let's have that factor in. And I'm going to start taking notes about this. When you keep copious notes about those small things that, again, are the behaviors that matter, right? That's going to accumulate. So those measures aside, where it's overall athleticism is going to rise, especially in our sport. Patience. I could give you 90 things, so I'll give you 2. I was going to say 1, 2. Patience, because you have to be willing to be like, this is the slowest process ever, and stick to it. And that is very hard, because you don't know when things are going to turn around. You don't know when you're going to get to be good enough, whatever that is, toward what you're doing. The other piece is that glass half full sense, So if you can come in and you aren't going to take things personally, that's going to help you be around your teammates more, So being able to be patient through that whole process and to bounce back a little bit more, that's going to help you. It's interesting, if you're physically resilient, if you stay physically healthy, that's going to help you be psychologically healthier. There's research to support that, so that helps with the glass half full, If I were to can I throw in a bonus and
of course.
The bonus is, so the bonus on top of that is that whole strong sense of team. Those are, as a coach, if I can get a cluster of people who are patient, positive, and work well together, that makes your job so much easier.
Yeah. But I think like what you're saying with patience, especially, it's like that idea of trust in the process.
Yeah.
Exactly what you're saying.
Yeah, yeah.
Because now a lot of people are like, oh, I want the instant gratification.
Yes.
Like
Yeah, and that's
social media, a lot of that's
Yes.
but the same thing. So
Very astute, Andre. And the other, even I find this in myself too, where we know there's plenty of research to support that, like, if you're actually writing, yes, this is a pencil that I've used so much that the eraser is rubbed off, right? I love pencils with actual erasers. This was a gift set that some people gave to me, and it actually says "Believe in yourself." It was backwards for you, but believe in yourself. And I mean, it's a whole series, and these are the ones that I actually used to edit my book when I was writing it. And then talk about patience for that. But, being able to actually write something down, being able to actually, distill things like this through the process, slow yourself down. You have time to process that. That's where, going back to the think piece of those big five, writing something down and taking time to, you can't go so fast. A voice note, you can spit that out really fast. Try and write that in cursive. Actually, don't even do it in cursive. Do it in not cursive. Cursive speeds it up, right? That slows you down to the point where you are now processing something and you're going to remember it so much better. Combine that with sleep, and all of a sudden you can actually retain the things that coach invited for you. Oh, I'll take a picture of that. No, that doesn't work. You won't remember it. If you literally write down what your heart rate was on this workout and how fast you went and what your stroke rate was, you're going to remember that the next day when you go back and do the same workout. And the next day, and the next day, and the next day. It's literally drawing it into your mind. You fire far more neural pathways using an actual implement than typing or speaking.
All right, that means college. I'm getting a bunch of notebooks.
Yeah, it'll help you, especially for the stuff that it's like you want to brain dump and you don't want to forget something. Don't just put it in a phone note, and that's why, this is why I say this, is writing, doing more writing now again. I love taking this little jumble of things and asking Gemini if it's a poem. But then that also doesn't allow you to sit with it. And one of the most important things is you write the thing down, you set it aside, because if you're dumping down creative ideas, you need a notebook to log them down and just let them sit, let them marinate, and then come back to them one at a time. So you can overwhelm yourself when things move too fast, and that's going to stall you out because your brain doesn't understand how to manage all that at once. So get some pencils, my friend.
Will do. So looking back, when you decided to drop sports at the end of high school because you believed you weren't good enough for the collegiate level, what would you say to your younger self now?
Be patient. I was telling, I had an appointment today, and I was telling the person that I was with, I said, I am a little over 6 feet tall. I was actually the smallest starboard that raced at the Olympics. That's part of the reason why I was in two-seat. I also like to think that I knew something about technique. Yeah, bow pair taught me the most about the sport. That's when I really started, because from one stroke to the next if you supported the boat or not, or if you overworked it or underworked it or hesitated, and so you can make everybody else's job easier. If you are very good at a bow pair of any boat, bow seat of a pair, bow of a double, bow pair of any other boat from there, and that allows you to set everybody else up for success in such a way that you have amplified your capacity to be a successful athlete, a fast athlete, the athlete that people want in the boat all the time, no matter what it is. Ask me your question again.
It was, now here it is. Looking back when you decided to drop sports in high school, what would you say to your younger self now?
Yeah. I was saying to this person that I was with today, I said, when I was younger, being 6 feet tall, that's where I went down the rabbit hole. I didn't like being tall. It was awkward. Clothes didn't fit right. I wear basically like a men's 13 or a women's 13. It's like a men's 11 and a half, 12 on my right foot, and then 11 and a half on the left foot. My 2 feet are slightly different sizes. It was awkward growing up. So that kind of like influenced, didn't help. It influenced the insecurity about myself and the person that I was. And that's why I was so self-conscious, even though sports is where I was able to hide. I put on that uniform and I was good out there, and no one was going to make fun of me because I was scoring points and, aces and all that kind of stuff. But as soon as I stepped out of that, I not having developed the confidence outside of the sport. You go into a flow state on the court, you're with your teammates, you're with your friends, people are cheering. It's very encouraging. As soon as you step out of that into real life and then someone kind of cuts you off at the knees because of the shoes you're wearing, you're like, oh. That patience, because I love being tall. I love the length of my legs. I wish I were taller, So to tell yourself that things will be okay, right? Just keep on trucking and try not to let what other people are saying to you knock you down. That doesn't mean that people shouldn't say or do things, because it helps you manage that, right? If you get to be 60 and no one has ever said a snide comment to you, it's going to be really hard for you to understand how to manage that by the time you're 60. So when you're young, you're a little more plastic. So, as long as you are having other positive influences in your life to help you manage that and realize that not everybody is mean to you, it's an interesting, all warts and all. I would not change a single thing about my entire, younger self, because it has allowed me to be this self that I really rather enjoy. Still warts and all. So stay patient, my friend.
Random question, because you talked about the shoe sizes. Did you have to buy 2 pairs of shoes, one of each size, or how'd that work?
No, I just, it's more evident now. I just, at the time, you're just wearing shoes that you didn't realize were too small. They were just too small. They didn't fit right. The shoes are my pinky toes tucked under, and I'm like, oh, it took me until I was much older, and now whole wide toe box shoes are a thing. You're like, oh, my toes should actually be like this, not like that. So now I just upsize to the point where it's comfortable for both feet.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we've mentioned your book.
Yep.
How did you actually sit down to write it? Because I know there's a lot of people out there who are like, I want to write a book. I want to write a book.
Yeah. People want to write a book. You got to sit down and write a book. When I mentioned earlier, I had some teammates even in 6th grade that made fun of me for my stories. They made like a little fake book, and I want to say it had like an orange cover, Lindsay's Life Stories, with blank paper inside, and they gave it to me. It was mortifying when I was in middle school, but they saw something. I started journaling when I was 17 or 18 years old. I started how do I write stories? What do I even write about? And I remember writing about where I was when my great-grandmother died. How do you write a book? Well, how do you know what goes into a book? So I just started writing stories, just writing things that I remembered out of my memory. Some of them I would embellish. Some of them were just straight, what do I remember? This experience. Why did I remember this thing? It was significant. I can't remember who it is, the exact author that said it, but anyone who has survived childhood has enough to write a book. That was the quote, right? So with that, I wrote more than 100 pages 2 times. I have a lot of what's called exploratory writing, which turns out is very helpful because it helps you go through just how do I articulate a full story arc? How does it start? How does it continue? What is my process? And so it also gives you the ability to put things onto paper and out of your mind. That way your brain doesn't constantly think, oh shoot, did I not put it somewhere? Am I going to lose it? Right? It allows you to let it go. So in the story writing process, after I wrote, more than 100 pages twice, I read a lot of books on writing. I actually went to a writing workshop where a bunch of editors and authors went through everything that I had read about writing and how to write a book that didn't make sense to me until I sat down in that workshop with people that were like, this is how you write a book. And it was like, but I read about this. How is this different? But for some reason, it all of a sudden made sense, And you basically start, when you look at a book and you open it up, you see the copyrights and all that information. You get to the table of contents. Table of contents is there. And then you have chapter headings. When you go to write a book, you start very similarly, where you just have all of these, you don't write the whole story, but you have all of these ideas of what stories might make sense in the timeline, and you just kind of list them as a table of contents. And then those turn into a series of things that you then architect out as an outline for each of those. You go, okay, this is the chapter, here's the hook, here's the points that are happening in this thing, and then you just look at it and you use it as a loose guide to keep you on the rails for what needs to go into that chapter. That way you can look at it like every single chapter in here has a hook, right? So I knew that chapter about the water bottle going over the bow was about that and being this thing that we weren't really sure, but that was a superstition that we didn't know was going to show up. Hence entering into that story with that line where it's like, where is this actually going? Oh, interesting. Now we're talking about this random water bottle that was flown here from California. If you remember the mountain biking story, there is a chapter that starts with a great analogy that a friend of mine told me the first time that I went mountain biking with her. And it was, how do you basically climb a hill? And that has turned into a lesson that I talk to every team that I've ever worked with about, where when you learn how to mountain bike, do not stare at the top the whole time. Because A, you're going to crash into a hole, hit a log, hit a rock, something here, because it's mountain biking. There's stuff in the way between you and the top. So you have to go scan the ground in front of you and just a little ahead of you. Stay aware of your immediate threats and immediate tasks at hand. And then every now and again, look at the top. so that you don't get discouraged by how slow you're going, because you might slip. The back tire, if it's dry, will slip on the rocks, that sort of thing. So again, as you're building it, you have a sense of where the story is going, and then you can then take that outline and go, does it make sense for that piece to go here? Well, let's switch it before you build out the whole story. Right? Mm-hmm. And then at the end of the day, you just got to write the outline, not get it perfect, not worry about it being perfect, because when you start writing, they call it a vomit draft, which just to its name, that literally means all you are doing is just writing the story and not looking back. You might write a sentence that says, my name is Andre, but it actually comes out as my name is, and nothing else happens, because that's how the brain works sometimes. Yeah. But you don't look back, and you just let it, and you get the whole thing down. So I had written, like I said, more than 100 pages twice and that was over years of time. So when I finally decided to go, I need to make this happen, otherwise I'm never going to do it. It took me 3 weeks to write the first draft. I just sat down and did it. I went to the workshop. It was a 2.5-day workshop. Came home with an outline and started writing. 3 weeks later, I had 40,223 words. And then my editor got 40,000 words, because I didn't want the book to be that long, right? So I wanted it to be about 150 pages, because I, remember, didn't like to read, so I didn't want it to be daunting for people to see it. So, like, if I saw a book that was like this on a shelf, I'd be like, I am not reading that. Give me, like, the Cliff's Notes, And so then when my editor got it, he basically said, this is very interesting, and just asked me a bunch of questions. He rearranged one chapter. I think he transposed one hook or one story. He basically just taught me how to write better. Give me more information about this. I need you to do more here. And then what I did was I took those 40,000 words and spent 6 months editing every day, 6 hours a day, for 6 straight months. And it went from 40,000 words to 112,000 words. And that's what you get here. And I kept saying, how do you know if it's too long? When do you stop the story? And the answer was always, the story is as long as it needs to be. Yeah. And if you think about it, think about right now, for you or anyone that's listening, that will be listening, think about a book that you really enjoyed. Any book that you enjoyed. As soon as I finish a book that I enjoy, I'm like, oh yeah, let me read the afterword, and where's the author from, and whatever's in there, you just keep reading it, and then you go back to the beginning. If you skipped the introduction, you go back to it. You read the dedication, you go back and read the title page, because you just want more of that experience that you just
the copyright page.
Yeah, and you're like, where's this from? How do I get another one? Where's the more? I want to know more about this thing, and that speaks to the story speaking to you. That is a story that was, the story stops when the story stops. And that's also where, I had a woman, and this has happened numerous times, which is also where the urge to write the second half of the story, which I've known since I wrote the first half. The people at the workshop just advised, they said, that's 2 separate stories. You can't put them in the same book. It's like, oh, okay. I was going to put the whole thing in one. And they were like, you cannot do that. That's not how this works, which was great advice. I had a woman that I coached through an adult learn-to-row program here last fall. And before the 2-week program was done, she picked up my book, read the book. She's coming into the dock in a single one day, and she goes, I read your book. I want to know what happens next. So I thought, shoot, okay, that means I need to write the rest of the story before I forget it, But I also think the second half of the story is a really awesome opportunity to get into some of the things that you started with, the questions you had at the very beginning of our conversation, which are so powerful and so applicable to life outside of sport. At the time when I had the idea for the second half of the book, I just didn't know how it ended. I didn't know where it would go, and now I have a greater sense of what actually needs to be in it and where it should go. So,
all right, I'm excited for when it comes out. Yeah. I will be reading it.
Me too. It is. I cannot tell you how many times the story that I was writing and the stories within the story that I was writing helped me be confident in what I was doing. Like when you are second guessing the words, when you are sitting with the edits and your pencils, and you've gone to FedEx Kinko's to print out the thing again, double spaced for hundreds of pages. And you're staring at it again and again and again, and you're like, oh my God, what's all this worth? The stories themselves are like, Lindsay, you lived that. Like, you can write a freaking book. Like, you can do this. It's the same, it's non-linear, but it's tracking in the right direction. It is the same thing.
So since we've been talking so much about stories, what's your funniest story you have from rowing?
Oh gosh, we have a lot of them. There are many of them. One of my teammates, who was one of the first teammates to actually read the original draft and the finished draft, she goes, "Shoop, where are all the other stories about some of the places that we used to go and do stupid things?" Like all the dance parties and things like that. And so we had a lot of that stuff too that just doesn't fit in the book. It also just tells a very different story in the book. But even the story about taking the view, all of our adventure runs that were just so silly, like you get lost on these things that are like, wow, he sent us into the middle of nowhere. Very intentional, because that was bonding. Some of the things that we went through that seemed so ridiculous, were just bonding experiences that took the potential harshness of like another winter Monday or Friday night in New Jersey and turned it into something that was a little bit lighter, which our coach was very good at recognizing kind of at key points. He pushed us when it was time to push, and then other times he's like, go run around the lake. Well, is there a path? Well, it's a lake. You can run around it, right? It has a circumference. Figure that out. And it wasn't the point that we needed to be back at a certain time. It was just make it around the lake and stay together. The directive was always stay together. A very early story that was funny, 2 pieces to this, is in my first year training when we were all in singles, we used to do a triathlon. And the triathlon was a loop around Lake Mercer, around the edges. You had to trace the edges of Lake Mercer, which obviously no one was taking the exact same meterage because you're not out there. It's not a buoyed course. You're just following the shoreline. You would dock, run up the apron with your single that wasn't yours, put it in slings, and take off running into the woods to go run a 5K in the woods, come out of the woods to jump on the rowing machine and sit down for, I think it was 8K that we would have to sit down and do. And that was a triathlon. Inevitably, somebody wouldn't put slings out before practice. So if you were last, it was like musical chairs. Either that or our coach took a pair away, as a joke. Ooh. Like, who knows, But it was like you're standing there. How can you go get slings from the boathouse? You have the single on your head. You're trying to keep up or win this thing, and you're running with a single. You don't do that. But one of the first, so that was a funny story there. But and we did those, and they were fun. They were definitely imprinted some like goofy ways to train, and it broke up the training. There were other times where we would run this 5K in the woods in Lake Mercer, and one of the first times that we did it, our coach wanted to measure it and make sure the distance of it. So he gave one of my teammates one of those like surveying tools that's like a little wheel that kind of clocks the distance as it turns. She ran with this thing for the whole time we were gone, running in the woods, like runs with this like cane out front, basically. But of course it's bumpy, so the thing's not rolling consistently. We get back from this more than half an hour run, and it read like 0.1 miles, something ridiculous, right? It basically didn't read the whole time that she's like running along and trying to push this into the dirt, running around in the woods on this trail, which is hysterical. And then the third silly story that I'll say, these are all from the first year, and there were many of these all the time, is that there was a guy that would come by, he was a chiropractor. I didn't really work with chiropractors. Everybody has their own opinion about that. I was never someone that saw the chiropractor a lot, but there was a really nice man who would come and offer his services. He would always bring a dozen donuts from Dunkin' Donuts, right? And he would leave it in the locker room for us while we were practicing. That way we get back, there would be like a donut there. There was always a donut missing. And we always thought it was just him, the guy that delivered the donuts. He was like having a donut. Come to find out, it was our coach. At least that was the story that it went with. And we were like, all these years, it was actually Tom eating the donut. Either because he took it and threw it away so that we would not eat the donut, or he ate the donut,
Yeah. Hey, maybe he really wanted a donut.
Yeah, exactly.
So I didn't send you this question ahead of time because it would have removed the surprise.
Oh.
What is one question you wish I asked?
Oh, gosh. I appreciate, I go down so many rabbit holes. I think I got to shoot out some things, and there's a lot, there's so much that we could talk about, but I really appreciate that we were able to talk about what made me stop rowing, right? Like why that changed, a little bit of the cultural shift, some of the things about teams outside, but also having an opportunity to talk a little bit more about kind of the other side of rowing, where it's like, wait, this might be harmful and not completely building up. And I think that actually the way that articulating kind of that moment on the podium where it absolutely amplified my emotional capacity, but having that understanding to decouple that from the need to have that sense of achievement. You know, I think that you asked some really good questions that went down some really good conversations. One thing I guess I can throw in here is that my middle name is actually Dare. That was my middle name. So I had to put it on the cover of the book. One thing that did not come out, but it was a story in the book, and I'll put this on here, is that, or I guess this is not a question, but it's just a statement that we didn't talk about, is that if you look at the cover of the book, there is this strip of paper down here. And that's actually, and I talk about it in the book, I don't talk about the cover in the book, but I talk about this. And this was the goals sheet that my college coach gave us when I was in college. This is actually something that I wrote. It's part of that image, something that I wrote back in the fall of my senior year in college. And the interesting thing is, because of Olympic copywriting, you can talk about the Olympics on the back as a part of your achievement, but you can't use the Olympics to advertise, right?
Really?
Yes. So that's why you don't often see, if ever, unless it's like an Olympic Committee book, the rings on the front of the thing. Michael Phelps is synonymous with the Olympics. You just need to put his face or his name, and all of a sudden people think Olympics, okay? So there was a line here at the bottom that I actually wanted to use instead, but because it said Olympics on it, I couldn't put it on the cover. And what it was the very first question on this goals sheet. And it was, if anything is possible for you in the sport of rowing, what would it be? And it was the first time that someone had just asked that. Like, why not just have a dream big moment? And it was, I dreamed to go. And it literally said, I want, but I X'd out want. And I put, I dreamed to go to the 2008 Olympics and win a medal. And if I could pick a teammate that could be in the boat with me. Right? But in reality, what I wanted was to go to that Olympics. I wanted to win that Olympics. And I actually wanted to win the pair with my teammate Molly, who was my UVA teammate and the Molly that's in the book that taught me so much. That would have been the absolute ultimate dream for us to be in any boat together, but to go win the pair with Molly would have been like this. I mean, that would just be insane, you know, and maybe that specific thing, maybe that didn't happen because I didn't, you know, really believe, but at the same time, that was a thought that maybe she did not have. And so I can't dream for someone else, you know? Yeah. So that also would have had an impact on it. But that is something that is really interesting about the process of writing a book, is that you have to follow rules. And truth be told, the NCAA was harder to work with than the International Olympic Committee when it came to asking about copyrights.
Really?
Yep. They were harder to get a hold of than the U.S. Olympic Committee, the International Olympic Committee, you know, my high school, University of Virginia, the Atlantic Coast Conference, you know, all of that. The NCAA was the hardest entity to get a hold of, to get answers from. Go figure. But yeah, yeah.
So we've been looking back at the past a lot about your journey through rowing. What about for the future? I know you mentioned the second half of a book. Yeah. Is there anything else?
Yeah. Putting these things down, and I've been starting to do more of it. I love coaching, you know, but I know that for rowing, the people that I work with routinely, I coach predominantly masters now, simply because it matches the pace of my life a little bit better. They always ask me, especially when it's gorgeous, dead flat column out, do you ever row? And I am, you know, working on coaching just enough that I really want to spend more time actually rowing rather than, you know, being around it so much that I need to step away. So for me, you know, the perfect day is to coach a little bit. I do a lot of commentary, and by a lot, I mean, you know, 3 to 4, maybe 5 kind of major events in the year. So I get to do the Sarasota 2K, ACC championships, SEC championships, NCAAs. I've done youth nationals a number of times. I've done 2 Olympics. I love the sport. It changed my life, you know, and those are really awesome things to get to do. Next is more writing, right? I want to be really, really good at that. And there are some poets and writers that I absolutely love. And something that is very encouraging for me is, you know, this book still has, I would love for it to be in the hands of more people, because I really think it can help a lot of people, especially because I don't think of myself as being anyone special. I just was able to focus on something and got to, you know, I think I got lucky chronologically with who I was with, not necessarily what I was doing. But have you heard of the book The Alchemist? A lot of people have. It's one of the most selling books of all time.
It sounds very familiar.
Yeah, so The Alchemist is a very popular book. I have a copy of it up there, actually. It's by a Brazilian author named Paulo Coelho. And The Alchemist has sold, individually as a book, more than 60 million copies worldwide. And this man has written...
Oh.
Yeah. It's up there close to, like, you know, spiritual books like the Bible and the Torah and the Quran. Right? Those are the kind of major books out there that have been bestsellers for ever. But it is one of the best-selling books of all time. And the interesting thing about The Alchemist, Paulo Coelho has now written more than 30 books and sold more than 320 million copies worldwide across his books. The Alchemist, when he wrote it, it only sold 900 copies, and it was dropped by the original bookseller. It was only when he wrote his fourth book, he kept writing, that he wrote his fourth book that people stumbled upon it and went back and found The Alchemist. And I say this for two reasons. It's very encouraging for me, right? Because it's like, how many times do you have to be told no before most people, it's the people that walk away after the first or second time. But there are many writers, many people in any outlet, any industry, even in rowing, that get told no and they walk away immediately. Sometimes it's like, well, what if you just didn't walk away that one time? That one more time. That's the hard thing to realize, because maybe if it's, you get told 15 times, maybe then we need to start, But the other interesting thing about it is that when I had that thought the night before my book went and was released, that I was like, holy cow, like people are going to have opinions about this and they might hate it. I looked at the reviews for The Alchemist. And I mean, even go look at the reviews for The Boys in the Boat, right? Lots of glowing reviews, but there will always be, right? If you go and you look at it, right? You go and you look at it, there are negative reviews. And oftentimes the negative reviews are very long and scathing, very long and scathing. And you're like, okay, if Boys in the Boat is going to be the best-selling rowing book right now, until people discover this.
Yeah, until better great than never.
Until more people, I should say. Yes. I know that it's been. I know Amazon is one of the outlets that people can easily get it from, and you should read some of the reviews on there too. They're pretty awesome. It's really like striking when I read them. 13 or 14 different countries people have picked it up in, even though it's only in English, which is really encouraging. It's very cool that someone in Italy or Japan or Colombia or Australia or Canada or Germany, France, the UK, like pick it up, and I'm like, oh, I wonder who that person is. I always go, I wonder who that person is. I wonder who they are, and I wonder where they are in the book, and I wonder why, how they found it, what got them. Anyway, so with that. Super encouraging to go, okay, one of the best-selling books of all time has thousands of scathing reviews about it, right? Keep writing, because these things are helping people. The same way whenever you have those doubts about things, you will forever and always have doubts. The same way that I feel when I read a book that I really enjoy, whatever that book is, I'm like, this is that for someone else and myself, because when I find it. So what's next? More writing? I'll still coach a bit, but more writing and more kind of shaping that creative storytelling career, which not that my stories would be this long, but I do have some really cool ideas about how to, especially through social media, share more stories and get people telling more stories kind of in little nuggets that include some pretty cool history of rowing and history of women's rowing in particular, and kind of to your point of what does it take to really kind of excel? What are these things about this crazy, weird sport that somehow help people?
Yeah. And for the audience, because I know some people only listen to it, it's called, if you want to, you can do the honors.
Go for it.
It's called Better Great Than Never. Believing it's possible is where champions begin.
Yeah. You can get it on Amazon, right? So you can even, it's crazy, if you type in Lindsay Shoop rowing, you can type in Lindsay rowing, and I'm the only thing that's going to pop up. But rowing book, it'll pop up too. So very easy to get on Amazon. And one thing I was going to say is, if somebody wants if you want a signed copy, then you can reach out to me directly through Instagram, which is Lindsay Shoop. Right, you just find me there very easily on Instagram. Send me a message, and we can kind of work that out if that's something that you prefer. But Amazon is going to be fastest.
All right. And so near the end of each episode, I do what are called blitz questions.
Oh, okay.
They are very much just like very easy questions. So, what's your favorite month of the year?
Oh, gosh. Easy questions. Of course, my brain immediately goes, September, my birthday. This year, September is probably June and September. I got to go to Italy with some friends and do some coaching in June. September, I'm going back to Italy. Got to do some hiking along. Yeah. Doing a little
I'm biased towards
research.
June.
What's that?
I'm biased towards June because that's my birthday month.
So. All right. Okay.
Where in Italy are you going back to?
I'm actually going to go to the Ligurian coast, which is the north kind of Italian Riviera. There are some pretty amazing hikes along there where it literally like 10th century abbey that you can't get to except by a 2.5-hour hike or a ferry ride. Things like that are available there. It's to absorb some textures and cultural information for some an idea that I have for a novel that I would like to write. So,
all right.
Yeah.
All right. What's your favorite food?
You're going to think this is weird, but beets just popped into my mind.
Beets?
Beets and figs are two things that I do eat quite a bit of. If I were 8, I would say pulled pork barbecue and crab legs, you know. I'm definitely a seafood fan, but, you know, you said it's a blitz question. Beets popped into my mind.
Yeah.
There's a can of beets on my counter.
All right.
I like mango,
There we go.
I like beets, I like green things. Hit me with some arugula, you know.
Yeah. The colors.
Yeah.
What's your favorite movie?
I mean, the first thing that pops into my mind would be Pride and Prejudice. And since we were talking about, and that was one that my teammate Mary and I would watch sometimes back to back on a Sunday when we were training, simply because we'd fall asleep and then turn it back on and fall asleep again. But we watched, for some reason, the Keira Knightley Pride and Prejudice version of Pride and Prejudice a lot at that point in time. I definitely have other movies that I'm sure I like since, but that one is going to be ranked up in there. Clueless is another one.
So, okay.
Yeah.
So, if you could do any sport other than rowing at the highest level professionally, like any sport, like I think I had someone who said cornhole, so like any sport, what would it be?
The sport that gives me enough time to write, right? Equestrian beach volleyball.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. What about you?
Ooh. I'd say Formula One.
I'd say that's very popular right now.
It's really cool.
Yeah.
I like this sport.
And I mean, you get to travel to some pretty awesome places as a result.
That's some really nice places.
Yeah.
And you get paid well.
Yeah. That's that. Hence the being able to have enough time and the resources to write.
Exactly.
Give me that, and I'm doing it. Sign me up. Yeah.
All right. If you had to put together a 4, including a coxswain, of fictional characters, who would you choose?
Does it have to go fast, or is it just like a great conversation?
Your choice.
So it's a
Either
Cox
one.
4 of fictional characters.
Cox 4.
Fictional characters only.
Yeah, only fictional characters.
I would have to. You know what I would do is I would put the writers that I look up to right now, at least, in there. So I would put Paulo Coelho in there, Haruki Murakami in there. I would put Mary Oliver in there, Ada Limon in there. That's 2 poets and 2 prose writers. I guess that's 4 people. And if I get to be in that boat, then maybe I'll cox it and just listen to them have a conversation.
Have a full book written by the time the row's over.
Yeah. Get some really good advice on the texture of the natural world.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Lindsay, for being on this episode.
Andre, I appreciate. I know that this is a long conversation, but I appreciate every last little bit of it, and I hope it really does help some people and kind of helps people reframe and rethink about some of the things, because rowing is something that can absolutely help you understand and be better at things. That will just the lessons that you can learn, the things, if you can take things that you learn from the boat and apply them to your life and do less of the opposite, less of infusing life into the boat, the whole world will be a better place.
Yeah. And thank you all for tuning to Secrets from Athletes. Make sure to follow us on Instagram at secrets_from_athletes. We're also on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, and iHeartRadio. So go make sure you listen to the episodes there.
Right on.
We'll be back with more Secrets from Athletes to help you. Thank you.